Recording. Right, welcome to our second presentation with the Nest Collective within Our House, Your Home at Stroom. Tonight we have Njoki Ngumi sharing her project, What We Left Behind, formerly announced as What We Saw. I'm Ludmila Rodrigues. I was invited by Stroom to host the Nest Collective within this program. Our House, Your Home is an experimental program of exchange based on hospitality, inviting international organizations for a mutual learning process. The Nest Collective is a multidisciplinary group from Nairobi, Kenya, working in film, music, fashion, visual arts, literature, and other media. Their work, being born in Nairobi, makes strong reference to African, urban, and contemporary experiences, establishing this as their primary datum for inquiry on histories and imagining possible futures. The Nest Collective is the fourth guest of Our House, Your Home, working with Stroom since 2020. Three members of the Nest Collective, Jim Chuchu, Sunny Dolat, and Dr. Njoki Ngumi, have been researching on textiles as a medium to unpack issues of belonging, identity, culture, and design. Due to the pandemic, we have collaborated remotely, experimenting with this online, hybrid, co-learning format. Through their project, Material Languages, they reflect on what roles contemporary African textiles play in the arenas of ritual, collective healing, and memory. Our speaker, Dr. Njoki Ngumi, is an artist, writer, and feminist thinker who has held positions in private and public healthcare sectors in Kenya. She's a member of the Nest Collective and coordinates learning and development for the Hiba Fund. With Material Languages, Njoki took on the task of processing a raw textile through manual dyeing, cutting, hand stitching into a quilted tapestry piece as an exercise in processing trauma and grief. With contributions by the members of the Nest Collective, Njoki pays homage to and reflects on, in her own capacity, the use of textile work as an exploration on collective memory making, archival work, and meditation. We'd like to thank the Prince Claus Fund for Culture and Development, Mondriaan Fund, and the municipality of The Hague for the support in Our House, Your Home. Please, let's welcome Njoki.
Stop it, Ludmila, oh my God. Hi, everybody. It's really amazing to see you all here. Every time I hear my bio being read, I'm just like, who is that? It's always a little bit interesting to hear like kind of your past and your present kind of being conflated into 2-3 paragraphs. Even when it's you who did the bio, it's weird. And I don't know when it stops being weird. Like I said before, you're absolutely free to leave your cameras on or off, but then we're keeping everybody mute until the point in time when we can have a conversation, which will be a little bit later. Let me get started by sharing my screen. Oh, yikes. Okay, today I'm presenting What We Left Behind, which is an exploration in spirit, memory, and hope via textiles. Our general presentation and engagement as the Nest Collective was as regards the use of textiles and the ways in which we can use it to unpack culture, unpack emotions, unpack futures and multiple different things. And so for me, I was really quite inspired because I joined the project a little bit later than Jim and Sunny. I was really inspired by the idea of exploring spirituality and energies. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. This is the introductory slide in which I say this is the first time in my life that I'm working with textiles that's not for a school assignment. I've always really loved textiles, and the time I said goodbye to them formally was in my high school because we had to choose between physics and home science, or like some people call it domestic science, something like that. The only reason that I didn't choose domestic science, which was the cooler subject by far, because the domestic science people used to cook and then everybody used to get to eat the yummy things that they cooked. And then physics was just people like figuring out inclined planes, gravity, and a lot of math. So, I mean, while I managed it, and I'm grateful that I did, I really wished I could have done home science, but I couldn't do it because the very first lesson we ended the sewing machine, I think I broke 3 needles in as many minutes, and the home science teacher gently told me that perhaps physics was going to be my calling, so I had to move on. But then, yeah, this, I think since then, which is very many years ago, because that was when I was in high school, I haven't engaged with fabrics and textiles, with the exception of doing a lot of support when the nest is working in these mediums, and buying clothes. So that's kind of where things were at the beginning of this project. I want to really focus on the ways in which this project made me a complete beginner. It took me a long time before I could use the name artist for my engagements with my thoughts, and for the ways in which there are things that I can bring from concept to realization. I think there are many words for that thing, but for me, that is the part of my practice that I choose to call artistry. I really wrestled with the idea of engaging with this project because working with textiles in any way would make me into a complete beginner. And not only would I have to be a complete beginner, I would have to like come up with something completely new within a new space. And sometimes we really wrestle with the idea of becoming complete beginners, especially when you grow older and you kind of get all of your props because of what you're good at doing. And so it's unlikely that when you're a beginner, you'll be good at doing a thing. And so that was one of my primary considerations. I also really wondered how I could interpret an exploration of spirit using textiles. But at that point in time, I was supremely interested in energies, and in the ways in which they flow from one person to another, the ways in which people can enter a space and change the mood with their presence, the ways in which you can see certain colors and feel certain things, and that it's very difficult to have complete control of those things. But for me, I was really interested in that process. On we move to asking for help. As a result of being a complete beginner, I really had to think about, okay, who do I go to that is really good at textiles? I didn't want to, and it's very is here, and thank you for being here, Sunny. I didn't want to kind of bother Sunny with the beginning of my project because he was also having to figure out his own. And so for this, I really actually chose to step outside of the collective, which is a really interesting choice for me, and go to somebody that we've worked with before. And so I went to somebody that I now consider a friend, and his name is Mukadam Latif. Mukadam was really great because he's worked with textiles a lot in his background in fashion and in manipulating fabric. So because I was interested in working with fabric and I had very many questions about fabrics, and when you're a complete beginner, you need to kind of try to decide where you're going to start, how you're going to start. And what you're going to do, that's what I decided to do. So I gave him a call, and I'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation when I'm talking about my timelines. I want to start talking about the constituent parts of the tapestry work. And the first one is spirit. And for me, I asked myself, is the medium textile or faith? I was really interested in the possibilities for a textile to be able to carry an intention, which is what I'm calling spirit. As regards carrying an intention, my first memory of that was actually, again, a scarf that Sunny made years and years ago when he was doing another fashion exploration, probably about more than 5 years ago now. And I remember always the ways in which whenever I wear that scarf, I'm instantly grounded. There are ways in which that can be considered talismanic, and I think it is. But for me, what I like to go back to is the intention that Sunny had when he gave me the scarf. And I feel strongly that that intention was that I would know that I am loved and that I am precious. Because also he didn't make many of those scarves. There were very, very few. And so I'm one of the few people who has an original Sunny Dolat piece like that. And I really love that scarf. I consider it something very special to me. And so the idea of imbuing intention into the fabric very, very important to me. And that was one of the things I was really exploring while engaging this project. I want to talk about archive in particular. And the very first iteration of this tapestry was actually going to be a kilt. I really love the ways in which, and the histories with which people used to come together and bring pieces of fabric from other things and put them towards making a kilt. And that this kilt could sometimes be special or focused on particular different things. And so you could have people coming together to make a kilt for a baby. You could have people coming together to make a kilt for a wedding or something like that. And like, aside from, of course, what can be very kind of heteronormative interpretations, there's any number of ways one can decide to gather all these memories into one space. The reason that I moved away from the idea of a kilt was because foundationally what a kilt is supposed to do is cover people. But the memories that I wanted to put into the kilt were not necessarily pleasant memories or memories that could have any number of mixed energies. And so you don't necessarily want to cover somebody with those energies, even though the intention of the tapestry is to carry them away. And so that's when I decided, okay, this is probably going to have to be something that is mounted in a very kind of different way. I was talking about energies just now, and this is when I talk about it as regards, is the medium textiles or vibrations? The kind of questions that I wanted to answer, and which is why the tapestry was originally called What We Saw. I was really deeply interested in exploring my own engagement with the year 2020, as well as the engagements of the Nest Collective members with the year 2020. And so I'd originally called it What I Saw. And I had wanted to have kind of a bit of a conversation with each member because we really kind of soldiered through the year as opposed to processing the year, because sometimes that's what you have to do. You have to keep moving, you have to keep running, you have to keep doing, and nobody really stops to feel. And so I wanted to use this tapestry to kind of bear witness to that time, which was another reason that it couldn't be turned into a kilt, because then you don't want to cover somebody in 2020, which is what I mean when I talk about the idea of vibrations. I really just was interested in whether the tapestry could be used to carry the thing away, whether we could bear witness to that particular moment. and then be able to fold it and keep it away and not necessarily have to feel those things again, or know that there's something that's helping us transmute the feelings away, which was the reason that I was deeply committed to energy. Energies are different from intentions, and I wanted to kind of give the difference between the two, as regards the energies being the things that I was receiving to put into the kilt, and then the intention being what I wanted to do with the kilt. And so that for me was the difference. I want to talk about an introduction to choice, which was my introduction to choice. For the people who know me, they know that I really take long to make decisions. And I'll talk about this again a little bit later. And that's why I call this slide Commitment 101, because it's like I discovered again that to kind of deeply to commit deeply to your artistic practice is also to commit to choice. You choose one thing, it means there's a number of others that you're not choosing, and you have to move forward with that one choice. It's like taking a fork on a one-way street. You can't go back. I had to make many decisions. I had to make decisions about what colors I wanted. I had to make decisions about what motifs I wanted. This sounds really easy, and definitely as regards my practice with the collective, it's become a lot easier because we have structures for choosing, we have structures for making decisions, and then there's more of us. So sometimes you don't have to make some decisions because some other people will make them. There are other decisions that you can make together. But for this one, I was kind of making decisions all alone. Again, this was different because I'm much more facile with other forms. When it comes to words, when it comes to speaking, it's very easy for me to make choices in that context. But then when it comes to a fabric, once you have your raw fabric and then you decide that you're going to dye it, that's it. You know, there are very few times that you can do that again or whatever. Once you cut the fabric, that's it. You've cut it, and then you can't proceed. And there's a lot of lessons there as regards even the ways in which events happen and these events that we choose to commit to our memories. Which are the events that we cannot take back? What are the ways in which we can accept them or refuse to accept them? Because that's also a way of engaging with them, but it's also a choice, and it has to be a choice. And so for me, this tapestry has really been an exercise in choice to the point where there's been a lot of fatigue. I want to talk about the idea of process, and I called this slide "Or How Not to Run Away When It Gets Hard," because it will. When I said I really felt like a beginner at the start, I think I was quite optimistic about the beginnerness of the process. I was hoping that memories of fabric manipulation from before would come back. There were many things that I was hoping, none of which really came to pass because I had to face each part of the process as it came. When it came to the dye, I had to realize that, wow, you have to test dyes. And so we had to test dyes a couple of times to really understand how the dye worked and how it interacted with the fabric, even before we got down to the process of doing the whole dyeing work. I had to test the cutting, even with a limited amount of dyed fabric, so that then I can really see, okay, I'm really committing to this size, or do I really want to play with sizes? Do I really want the thing to have multiple different sizes of pieces or not? And so that's everything that was going on in that regard. I think the whole idea about accepting that things get hard, again, goes back to the ways in which adulting is done. And when I tell you that this tapestry is making me really kind of go back to zero on so much, that's part of the whole thing. It's very easy to leave the things behind that we are not good at, because it makes us feel bad to not be good at things. It makes us feel bad to be bad at relationships. It makes us feel bad to make mistakes. It makes us feel bad to meet setbacks. And there were many moments, and I don't think I've told even Ludmila or Jim or Sunny that I've really wanted to just kind of say, actually, maybe it's not a must, and leave the whole thing alone, but part of the thing has been going back to ask myself what my intention was when I began, and adding an intention to complete to the whole thing. Again, as regards that, I really did ask myself why I didn't pick something that was easier. And then I remembered that this is because it was not an easy thing that I was choosing to process. And so nothing about the ways in which I could process it was ever going to be easy. In many ways, the ideas of grief of what we lost in 2020, the lives we could have lived in 2020, the places we could have gone, the things we could have done. And while a lot of us, because we are alive, because we are still well in many ways, have lost a lot. We lost certain life paths that we cannot get back because this is a different world now. We lost things that we could have done that could have taken us in different directions, and we didn't get those. There were other things that we could have gained as well. None of that has been an easy process, and kind of coming to terms with that has helped me also understand the process of making this tapestry a little bit better, because yeah, it's not easy. The thoughts that I'm processing are not easy. The thoughts that the collective are sharing are really beautiful thoughts, and they're also very deep thoughts and very heavy thoughts, which are going into this tapestry as we speak. And so, yeah, when there's something that some of us in the collective like to say, which is that sometimes the work chooses you. And so I have accepted to be chosen by the tapestry in the same way that I think I choose it. Maybe it's actually quite different. I want to talk about time. If there's a thing, and we kept talking about this together with the members of Stroom, in the process of doing this project. We started it a really long time ago, and there was the full intention that it should work out completely differently than it has. I like to say that time kind of got fractured and warped last year. Sometimes a week passes and you don't know how a week has passed. Sometimes a day feels like 7 or 14. Sometimes an hour feels like 5 minutes, and sometimes the same hour can feel like 20 days. Like for me right now, because I'm packed with nerves, it really does feel like that sometimes. And the ways in which you'll be like, is it Monday? Is it Friday? And then someone tells you, no, it's Saturday. No, it's Tuesday. There's definitely that. I think another thing that I met with this tapestry when it reintroduced me to how I view time is that with many things, we're able to get what we want, especially when we're working together as the collective. When it's just you, things can work out very differently on the paths that you've chosen. And so, for instance, sometimes life events will happen and then they just overtake you, and you have to follow the path that they've chosen and the times that they've chosen, and you're subject to those things in many ways. So I feel like that has been quite a process for me as well. I want to talk about trust. There were many assumptions that I made when I said that I wanted to process something as myself and together with the collective. I made the assumption that they were going to be willing to process the thought of what was left behind with me. I think that they are showing me immeasurable levels of grace in being able to be honest with me. It's very easy to hide, to give a thing that you don't necessarily want somebody to have as the first thing that you offer. But with every single member of the collective that has shared their answer as regards what they want to leave behind with me, it has also made me go back to ask myself what I want to leave behind with as much honesty as they have been able to master. I think I had to drastically simplify my original idea, which was going to be a little bit more complicated to interpret. And so why I even had to rename the entire piece of work had to do with reframing the question. I think also reframing the question also changed the energies that I wanted to put into the tapestry. And I talked about energies a little bit earlier as regards the ways in, how do I put it? I think I had wanted to store the grief in the tapestry before, as a way of honoring it. But the new question has allowed me to see that letting it go is also a way of kind of engaging with it, and that letting it go is also part of the memorial. So in some ways, like the ghost of the idea will still be represented on the tapestry, but the foundational thing will be let go in the process. I want to talk a little bit about my process and where I am in it. I have finished the dyeing and I'm supremely excited about that because it really took long. If Mukadam is on the call, he can really tell you what a process it took, because we were also I felt like it was a process of getting to know the fabric, but it was also a process of getting to know the dye. I discovered very many things about that particular dye, including that it works best over heat, which then meant that the process of dyeing was going to be one of almost cooking the fabric over fire. And that really took a while because there was a bunch of fabric to do over a period of time. And so we really spent long nights over ajiko, just kind of stirring. Ajiko is like a charcoal burner. So just kind of stirring and stirring and stirring, turning, pushing down the fabric to make sure that there were no air bubbles, turning it over, stirring again. I really thought about whether I wanted to share photos and video of that process, because I really do have it. But they're truly like the least glamorous pictures in the history of life, because you can see like kitchen gloves, there's my slippers, there's my dera the Maideras that I wear when I'm working. A dera is kind of like a plain straight cotton gown that people wear just kind of to relax. I'd really thought about doing something a little bit more structured, but then there was something about doing it in a dera that made me feel like I was at home with myself, because I wear deras so often anyway. So I felt like kind of engaging in the process while wearing a dera was the best thing that was going to be true to myself. The second part of the process is what I'm calling stitch and gather and stitch, which is where I cut pieces and stitch them back onto the general background of the tapestry. I will better be able to show that once there's a video, and the video will be ready once the tapestry is done, because it's not, and then this was part of accepting time not being what you want it to be. I was really interested in being able to echo the ideas around what was being left behind with embroidery. And so with each piece of yellow fabric that I cut and then stitch eventually onto a black background, I'll be able to do embroidery in red that kind of represents the idea, my interpretation of the idea that each different member of the Nest Collective is giving me about what they left behind. And there are very, very many beautiful thoughts. So that's kind of what stitch and gather and stitch is, because part of it is exploring the idea itself, interpreting it, and then stitching it back on. When that's done, I'll be halfway done, and then the last bits will be actually the easiest, I think, because that's when now, and they're very technical, that's when I mount the tapestry on something that will be a little bit firmer, so that it can then be put up, mounted on a wall. So then it will be mounted on other fabric so that it can be mounted on a wall. And then I'll be able to kind of represent it by filming it, as well as presenting an interpretation of the thoughts that were shared with me that went into the tapestry as part of the process of letting it go. So that's kind of a summary of what my process has been, where I chose to use a very, very raw kind of off-white cotton, which I dyed into two colors, black and yellow. And I can, if I was doing the presentation on how to dye things black and yellow, it would be another half hour or something. I'm currently on the Stitch and Gather and Stitch place, which is where I am putting together all of the ideas that the members of the collective are giving me, after which I will mount and do the filming of the wider thing. I was really interested in memorializing my dates because looking at them is also telling me something about the ways in which time has been a part of making this tapestry. And I was looking at my messages to see when my timestamps were. The 4th of March was when I committed to asking for help, and I have the message where I texted my friend Mukadam to say, hi, this is the thing that I want, and it makes no sense to me yet. So I kind of wanted to tell him what I was thinking and hear how he was hearing it, because sometimes listening to how somebody else has heard you is another way of listening to yourself. And so I've really kind of relearned for myself with my own practice, in the same way that we know within the collective's practice, how kind of listening to somebody reiterate something or listening to somebody's opinion about something or their analysis of something is supremely useful. We did our first dye test a little bit over a month later. It really took a while because in between we were looking for the fabric, as well as deciding on the dyes that we were going to use. And so this was a point in time when we realized that, yeah, actually, you can't just kind of dive in and do everything. You have to understand how the dye works, because I had decided to work with both black and yellow dyes. And then I rightfully assumed that they would work differently. This was a really interesting thing, because the black dye is particularly temperamental, and sometimes it will never come out the way you want it to come out. It'll gray on you. It'll do all sorts of things, and it's not the best. Even sometimes when you take it out of the water, it looks really dark and beautiful, but then the proof is when it's dry. So when you look at it and it's dried is when you'll see all of the mistakes that you made, and realize that actually it might need to go back for a second dyeing, which was one of the reasons that the dyeing process took so long, because there was so much happening. The yellow was a lot friendlier. We chose a particularly lovely shade of saffron, and that one was really lovely. Even when it became light, it was quite even, and it went a little bit banana, which was quite fun. But the black was really the issue. The black is actually the reason that we had to do a second dye test, and in that we were kind of trying to understand how to make the dye work better. We'd watched and read a little bit more about fixatives. The dye itself had recommended that we use salt, and because this was a very home process, and aside from the dye, I didn't necessarily want to use multiple other chemicals, because that would then mean that maybe the dye would become something else, because that's not necessarily how it's designed to work. So we used salt. There were the ones that we tried with vinegar. When we tried with vinegar, the end product would actually have quite a vinegary smell, which was quite ridiculous. But yeah, the second dye test was a lot more technical, and slightly less challenging than the first one had been, because at least now we had a feeling of what the dye was. One thing that I learned in the process of doing this first dye test and the second dye test is how quickly human beings do kind of risk mitigation, because the first time I was deeply committed to wearing gloves, like all of the things that you're supposed to do. The second time, I mean, it was like you can use your hands. And you're not supposed to. And I realized that this is very much a human thing. So I think I had some rather dyed fingers after that period of time. And I'm very grateful that the dye came off, because sometimes you're not that lucky. I'm really grateful I didn't choose to use like henna or something. That would have been insane. On the weekend of the 2nd of May, that period of time is when we actually did the wholesale dyeing of the amount of fabric that we had chosen to use. There was a lot of math involved in the dyeing, because each sachet of dye is supposed to work in a particular amount of water, which is supposed to dye a particular amount of fabric. And then the fabric we had chosen was a little. So there was a lot of math going on there. And then now we had to do it in batches, because the charcoal burner was a particular size. The pan that we were using, the aluminum pan, was a particular size, which means that you can't put as much fabric as you'd want inside it. So that then meant that part of the tapestry began as being 2 pieces, which was really interesting, at least the background of the black. And then the yellow, I was able to do in one go. I was able to complete the cutting of the pieces. And so the tapestry currently exists in a bunch of pieces, which are pinned to the background. I was able to complete that on the 11th of May, which was a couple of weeks ago. And I'm really excited about that, because now I'll be getting into the embroidery phase. There's something really calming about embroidery. And just kind of being able to listen to music or be outside and watch things happen as you work. I think like I've really accepted many things about the ways in which older women and older folk will kind of sit down with knitting or sit down with crocheting and kind of go deeply into meditation about it. And I'm considering that part of the process of noticing and minding the energies that are going into the tapestry, as well as working deeply on my intentions with the fabric. One of the things that I'm also doing is trying not to let the fabric know how frustrated I am with it, because I feel like that will eventually affect my process as well. So I have to go to it with kindness, both to it and to myself, which is teaching me a lot. On the 14th of May, I am calling that part accepted a pause, because there was a lot happening in my life, including my house flooding. So I had to move house rather urgently. I call that part accepting a pause, because sometimes you have to re-strategize and recalibrate. As regards your timelines, I really thought about rushing, and I decided maybe not. That was not necessarily the thing that I want to do with this particular process, because I've been so slow and intentional about getting it correct with dye tests, with cutting it slowly. And so as regards having to finish it and mount it and present it, even for the presentation, I accepted that was not what was going to happen today, but that I could tell the story about its process and where it's going and what I want to do with it, as well as share my learnings until this point. And that this has also helped me figure out that for the video, I want to be able to do kind of a voiceover where I share some of these thoughts that have been brewing as the process is going. So this is the last slide, which is the too long don't read at the top, in which I share my last thoughts. My last thought is that it's been really interesting to me that even as regards thoughts, you can Marie Kondo your thoughts in a sense. You can decide which memories you want to keep. And which memories you want to work on finding a way to put them in a different filing cabinet in your head. They don't necessarily all have to be at the forefront. Of course, this is this is difficult when it comes to moments of grief and moments of trauma. Sometimes those ones have to take their own time sorting themselves, and you have to respect them. But then with us here at this point in time, kind of trying to process what last year was, depending on what it gave us and what it took away from us, there are some things that we can start to sort as regards the lives that we had then and the lives that we have now. So I really wanted to say that. I have really been thrilled to learn the ways in which textiles can enable us to keep these memories, whether inside our hearts, inside our spirits, inside our minds, or outside, such as through this tapestry, such as through the scarf that I talked about earlier that Sunny gave me, whose intentions and the memories of it and of the time when he made it and what he was trying to do when he made it are so clear to me every time I see it. And so even as we decide how we're going to sort with memory, with energy, we can decide how we're going to keep it. And maybe the last thing that I want to say is that there is such a thing as a collective memory, which is what the tapestry, what we left behind is an homage to, because different people remember different things differently. And so that is one of its foundational ideas, as well as you can decide that you want to go through a process like this to keep a thing alone. And that's what a lot of people do when they journal, because a journal can be a very private thing. But I'd really like to encourage you to decide to keep some memories together with some people, to go over a thing together, to share what a thing is together, maybe to externalize it or not. But it's an exercise in trust and in intimacy to decide you want to keep together, because even the ways in which ownership is framed is that it's easier for it to be done as an individual. So I will definitely be sharing later the finished video, as well as pictures of the process when it's a little bit more together than it is now, because it's currently in a number of pieces, but they're all very happy, very accepting pieces. And for that, I'm glad.
Thank you so much, Njoki, for sharing the process. It was a real journey with you. And yeah, of course, we are very, very curious now, because it became somehow a storytelling of the process, and we can all have our own tapestry in our imagination, I guess. Everyone here has a different one, probably, a different image. Only you know how it looks like, but somehow it is also fun to imagine it. And
I'm remarkably bad at renders.
No.
So well, I really didn't want to, if I had come and like kind of put a render of it, I feel like everybody would have really felt deeply sorry for me, but also be unable to say that they were sorry for me. So we would have been in this kind of stalemate, like the Spider-Man meme, where Spider-Man is looking at Spider-Man and nothing is moving forward.
Well, and I would say maybe the render would not be the best way to show it, and probably, yeah, you knew it already consciously or unconsciously. So what I feel like when you took the challenge to work on a tapestry or a textile project, which is completely new for you, it was really, like you said, like becoming a beginner. And then I guess, I think every artist has that you need to find your way, find on your path to materializing something. It is really hard to find your own voice as a textile maker, I guess, because somehow we are all familiar with textiles through, everyone has their own experiences. But now, the moment you start making it, and you have to come, with the choices and techniques, of course, I can imagine you must have been confronted with all possibilities you can imagine. I don't know if your connection is still there. Is it my connection? Okay.
Absolutely. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now you're back.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm very sorry about that. What?
Yeah, so it seems that we have one question, but would you like to reflect on that again, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely would. I think allowing myself to become a beginner has taught me many things about childhood that I was very glad to have left behind, quite frankly. But to revisit them with kindness is a very new thing. I often reflect about when we kind of switch from being kind of enthralled by a child's cuteness to when we become irritated by the fact that they're slow, by the fact that sometimes they need to tell you things over and over again, by the fact that sometimes like you'll punish them and they'll forget, and that even the frame of kind of, we are very glad that children go to school and somehow come back civilized. And I don't even have, a child, but I'm deeply familiar with that process, in the ways in which, and the ways in which people have to go through it with a child. And I feel a little bit in this process like that in the middle child who wants a thing to happen fast, but it can't, who wishes they were faster, but they're not, who asks for help and who asks for a contribution with the hope that somebody will, give it to you with honesty and with care, and that has really taught me quite a bit, being able to do that as part of this process, and then also watching the other two processes move a little bit faster, and then kind of bringing myself back home to myself and to my slow process, accepting the places where I can have help and then the places where I have to kind of soldier through on my own. All of those have been remarkable for my process and for my engagement as a baby in this process.
Beautiful. Yes. And I have other many questions, but we can open now for the audience. We are receiving the questions in the chat. So we're going to start by Adelheid Smith. Thank you, Njoki. Very interesting to hear all your process. I'm curious to hear which pigments you used for the black. And could you say more on why you chose black and yellow as main colors? Thank you.
Adelheid, thank you. First of all, like your name kind of rhymes with Edelweiss or not, but I like the connection in my spirit, because Edelweiss is a song I really love. I used kind of just a hot water dye. It's a water dye, which also means that once it's washed, many interesting things will happen to it as a tapestry. And so I also have to make decisions about whether it should be washed as a whole in water, so that then it becomes different things in different iterations of its being, or whether it should be dry cleaned and so kind of preserved. I'm really enjoying the idea of letting go of what can happen to it. So it might be cool to see what happens as it goes. But it was kind of like a regular inorganic hot water dye, and I used a brand called Dylon. Because it's also the brand that's quickly available here. I chose black as the background because it was quite prosaic, actually, that part, that the black was kind of the in memoriam part. And as regards the yellow, I really wanted whether the things that we saw, whether they're going to be the things that we saw, the things that we left behind, to stand out. And beyond the yellow, I decided that I wanted to do the embroidery in red. So it'll be quite a striking piece once it's done. I'm not even like, with the exception of black, like yellow and red are not necessarily even my favorite colors. They just felt like what was right. And I was really also learning how to listen to my intuition and not necessarily explain everything, which is very difficult for a person who likes explanations. So moving intuitively in this process has been also kind of like learning another language. So yellow felt right when I was looking at the choices of dyes in the shop as a background for the black. And so I really chose that. I regretted the black sorely and felt like I should have chosen another dark color, which might have had more manners, but maybe in general, dark dyes are not very interesting to use when you're doing them at home or within limited capacities. So if I decide that I'm going to wrestle with dye in my next fabric piece, I'll be able to see if I wrestle with black again and win, because with this one, I didn't really win. I feel like the black and I are at a tie, and that the black has an extra penalty shot waiting. So that's kind of how it is.
Yeah, gorgeous. I can imagine you're listening, or you are observing how the work develops, and then you can make decisions, which might be intuitive, but yeah, it is what the work is asking for. Sometimes. Yeah,
very much.
Yeah. So we have some other questions. One from Anand Madhvani, tie-dye. Well, there was just an enthusiastic comment or not?
Thank you, Anand. When we were kind of stirring the fabric in the dye into the midnight hour, Mukundam and I talked a lot about tie-dye as a thing, and the joy with which children do experiments with tie-dye. And we talked about how people are able to tie-dye at factory level and make things look identical. I guess maybe that's like a print or something. But yeah, tie-dye might be interesting. It really might. I will strongly consider.
For this for this project, or a new one? Yeah.
This one it's too far gone. I can't return it to the drawing board and tie dye it now. It'll also ask me what I'm doing, because it feels like it now has opinions.
Great. So we have one from Elizabeth Jeru. I don't know much about textiles, and I'm amazed at the powerful connection you make to textile and processing deep emotions, memories, and even using it as a tool for healing. How did you think of this? Or is it a body of work?
That's a really lovely thing to say, because that's exactly what I want this textile to do. I'm really invested in finding ways to represent intangible things tangibly, and so the ways in which being able to touch something can ground is deeply tied to some thoughts that the Nest were having about, I don't know whether to call it a work in progress or a work that has not begun. We were deeply thinking about talismans at some point, and the things that take us to particular places when we want to take them to those places, when we want them to take us to those places. So the ways in which kind of you want a memory to move through you, or you want a thing to represent a memory, were ideas that I was really processing. I consider this kind of process of moving the memory onto the fabric, and then letting the process of manipulating and processing the fabric as a process of letting it go. I consider that a ritual as regards fabric engagement, and the idea of using textiles for ritual is something that I've been deeply inspired by my collective member, Sunny Dolat, who is exploring ritual very intentionally as part of the work that he's doing. And he'll be talking about that when he speaks with us next week. But yeah, I don't think it's like a thing that I necessarily thought of from the root as itself. It was more kind of putting together two different thoughts. Is, can we make intangible things tangible? And what things are ritual useful for? And can moving kind of like a ton of grief and a ton of hurt or a ton of regret be part of it?
Thank you. Do we have one more? I do have one. So in the meantime, I would like to ask how you engaged your Nest fellows, squad. What kind of instructions or what kind of rules or parameters did you create with them? And yeah, how was their contribution?
The tapestry actually became what we left behind very recently, because for a long time it was what we saw. And I thought for a long time about kind of doing, remember when I said we were going to have the call and I was going to have a long conversation with them, I thought about doing that for a long time. But then I decided to, in the same way that I was kind of giving you my timestamps, I decided to use our messages from that period of time and the conversations that I was having with different individuals at different times, and my memories of those conversations, to kind of start that process. So I have like scribbled maps of the trajectories of those conversations, interpretations via graphs, interpretations via diagrams, thinking about, can it be simplified into an emotion? Can that emotion be represented visually? What kind of visual representation would that be? It also became quite mathematical. And I could also start feeling myself moving away from the more intuitive flows that I had begun with the rest of the project. And so at some point I decided that this kind of methodical approach was not necessarily going to be useful, because it's like asking somebody, is it like a cup of grief or a teaspoon of grief? You know, are they not all grief? Do they not all feel the same? And so, yeah, it was very, very recent that I asked, that I arrived at the question, what did you leave behind last year? As just the kind of one entry point, even for myself. And I'm really grateful that I did, because even the answers that I'm getting are really inspiring.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, yeah. And then I was also wondering, you answered about the black pigment, and then I was curious about the yellow. You mentioned it was some sort of tint from saffron that became towards a banana, which was, yeah, really funny.
That was the yellow. The black was just kind of deciding whether it was going to be like charcoal or slate or gray. It was quite a process.
Yeah, interesting.
And was that?
Sorry, was that also the same method, the hot water dye you mentioned?
Yes.
Oh, right.
Yes. Yeah. I think the first dye test, we actually did it with warm water, but then we didn't keep the heat going. And so then we decided, what happens if we keep the heat going, which was kind of what the second test was going to be. And then that's what was really exciting.
Yeah, indeed. We have another one from Louis Braddock Clark. Thank you for sharing your insights, Njoki. I'm particularly interested in the idea of letting emotions go through the action of weaving. If decision-making is done while weaving, does the pattern you're making change drastically?
That's a really interesting question. I think it would depend on how well you know the medium, honestly. Because like, for instance, for me, it's embroidery, and you have to make a decision about how you're going to embroider very early on in the process. And so you kind of go with the thing, unless you decide that you're going to change the diagram as you go. That would definitely be it. But then I think if one was weaving, it would depend on how well they know the loom, and how they decide to like maybe change colors or maybe change patterns as they go. Because I think, because that's kind of a thing that can happen in process, it can be done. I feel like you have to know the medium very much to kind of make decisions on the fly in some ways. So that's what I would say as regards decision making. As regards decision making, for embroidery, you'd have to stop and redraw the thing that you're trying to embroider onto the piece of fabric. Weaving might be a little easier, but it also depends on how good a weaver you are. Perhaps that's what I would say. I don't know. Ludmila, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not a weaver also, so it's hard for me to say. Yeah, it's hard. I don't know. And yeah, I can imagine there are different materials, different scales and different techniques within. Yeah, I really don't know. But I was also thinking about what you've mentioned about the energy you put in the work, this vibration that is really beautifully translated in the material, in the end result, of course. Not somehow the tapestry is the register of this intention, but also the labor you put. That is really beautiful. I'm very curious to see what's coming from it.
I'm also curious to see it. So we are together.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and then again from Louis Braddock Clark. Ooh. So perhaps then the mistakes or the noise could then reflect the change in emotions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that was yeah. And then a comment from Elizabeth Njeru on Louis' super interesting question. I think that if one totally lets go of control and lets emotions rule, it will drastically change the end production. So yeah, so we have an interesting conversation here in the chat.
Yeah, Elizabeth, you're absolutely right. I feel like I have one idea about what the thing is going to be, and I have to commit to that idea, which is why I talked about commitment, especially for me, because I really wish I could still have options as a thing would go, because I feel most at home with options. Also because options are thoughts. But that, yeah, if one decided to let go of control, then absolutely the end product would be something else entirely. Maybe also the chosen kind of forms are different, and also the time at which you choose to lose control, because if I had lost control at the dyeing place, then we would be in a very different place as we speak. But then with a place where it's like, okay, now the wider thing has to be filled with an embroidery, then I have to commit to that. And then now the place of losing control is to decide what I'm going to embroider. Am I going to use abstract forms? Am I going to use recognizable forms? How large are the stitches going to be, or how small? And that even then you're still making a commitment, because if I choose large, small, how you arrange those is really going to affect the end product still. So yes and no. I feel like with this process, letting go of one control means you're seizing onto another one, and a different set of rules, but there are still rules in many ways.
Absolutely. Adelheid, where will the final work be shared? Very curious to see.
So one of the things that we're working on for our house, your home, is an online exhibition, and I'm really gunning for everything to be done by then, because a lot of things are a lot more settled for me than they were when everything was going to pot and I had to move and what have you. So there's a lot that's much more settled for me now, and so I'm gunning to finish by then. I think the exhibition is slated to begin, is it on the 9th of June?
On the 9th, that's a Wednesday. Yeah, that's the plan to launch online.
Yes, so it'll definitely be on the 9th of June. I'm also trying to figure out where I can mount it physically, not just necessarily for the purposes of taking the video, because the video is what will be in the exhibition, but also where it can be mounted physically. So maybe I can have a conversation with Ludmila about what putting it in the Stroom window or somewhere in the Stroom compound would be, as part of us kind of slowly exiting our house, your home, so that somebody else can be at home at Stroom for a little bit. But yeah, it'll be probably in the next 2-3 weeks.
Wonderful. Yes. And by the way, at the moment we have the window display, which I didn't mention before. I was planning to mention later, but maybe this is the moment to say that we're sharing the process of the Nest Collective here in The Hague at the Stroom window with 9 fabrics developed by Sunny and Jim during this project as well. And yeah, and then Njoki will be the latest and most awaited contribution. And then we have one more question from Rinke Fienrik. Thank you so far, Njoki. Do you think your approach is usable for social or environmental works?
That's a really interesting question. I think I have a follow-up question. Do you mean social and environmental works that are done by groups of people or that are done by single people? Because I think that would be important.
Yeah, maybe they can answer it because I also don't know. It does ring some associations in my mind, but I don't want to answer for them. Sorry? They don't go on? No. Okay. Oh yeah, if Rinke would like to answer that.
For groups at first. Okay. I feel like it might, depending on how the process is controlled, if you have like a central group of people kind of running control and making the decisions, it might be interesting. It might really be an interesting way of unpacking. I felt like, for instance, with the dyes, like now that I'm after the dye, I really thought, should I have used more environmentally sustainable dye? That might have been nice. But then I was really interested in like the strong colors. And so sometimes you don't necessarily get those with organic dyes. It's quite difficult. And that should have been a different process. And that thought just kind of jumped into my head by the kind of use of the word environmental. I feel like, in a sense, a garden is a tapestry you plant in a way. And so maybe like a group kind of community garden might be an approach like that. But I don't know about social works unless if they're being curated kind of centrally, it might be possible. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Do we have one more? No. Yeah, wonderful. We are all looking forward then. And and don't rush, I would say. That is also, I guess, the pace of the ritual. It is really, a new work being generated with a lot of, love and effort and, and reflection. So, but we'll see it in June. And thank you. Would you like to finalize? Oh yeah, someone said, I'm sorry. Someone says in the chat, Kegs, a garden, that is totally a tapestry. Thank you for that thought. Yes.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I also will stay with the options are thoughts. I will meditate on that as well. That was really nice. Yeah, thank you.
Anand, thank you for this thought about the British Quaker tapestry as a crowdsourced model. So me and Rinke, I think, will be very excited to go and see that.
Yeah, so whoever is in The Hague, you're very welcome to come visit us. We might be opening the doors next week. For small groups. And well, thanks everyone for staying with us until now. I want to thank Njoki as well for the really moving sharing process. And please join us again next week for the presentation by Sunny Dolat on futures and heritages of textiles, which might be also super exciting, I'm sure. And you can check the exhibition here in The Hague in the Hogeval, number 129, pretty close to the city center. And yes, of course, please visit our website, stroom.nl, and thisisthenest.com to follow the project closer, and of course, the social media as well. And we hope to see you next week. And thank you. Thanks a lot. And I'm sorry, there was one more. Someone commented a lot of thanks. I'm sorry.
Will the link be shared tomorrow? I think so, right?
The link to
next week.
Of course, yes. We shall be creating the event. We didn't want to promote before Njoki's, but we should be planning it and releasing tomorrow. Yeah, the Facebook event, Eventbrite, and so see you next Wednesday, same time with Sunny Dolat. And
thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for listening to me as I talk a lot and show you nothing, because this is the height of being led on. So thank you for agreeing to be led on by me.
Thank you.